You're listening to the Closer Than You Think podcast, where female entrepreneurs are committed to healing, growth, and liberation in all areas of their life. I'm Tanya, and I'm an ex-corporate brand and marketing strategist turned trauma-informed internal family systems therapist, human design and gene keys guide, multi-passionate creative entrepreneur, and podcast host. I'm obsessed with raising the frequency of the planet, and through my gifts of empathy, perspective, and embodiment, I help entrepreneurs gain deeper self-awareness about the resistance they're experiencing on their ascension journey. I infuse my deep understanding of psychology, energy, and shadow work to support my clients in raising their emotional intelligence and reclaiming their power in all areas of their life, so ultimately they can craft their own destiny. Together, we unravel decades of conditioning and shame so they can conquer self-sabotage, liberate their mind, open their heart, and lead themselves to success and beyond. I'm committed to sharing so much magic and wisdom by interviewing the most incredibly talented and devoted creatives, healers, and entrepreneurs to support you on your transformation journey to more freedom, fulfillment, joy, and good karma. And remember, no matter what challenges you're facing in life or how undesirable the circumstances, no matter how lost, stuck, and frustrated you might feel, there's always a bigger plan. And if you trust that and commit to riding the waves of life with grace and courage, you're closer than you think. Today's guest is a money healer and business mentor. Emily's mission is to help female entrepreneurs uncover their money wounds and heal them in community so that more money flows to embodied women and collectively uplevels the planet. Oh, I love that. While building 3, 6, and 7-figure businesses, an e-com store, a media agency, and coaching company, Emily decided to ditch the belief that it had to be hard. She tapped into her feminine energy to allow more ease and joy and support from her team. And she uses energetics and a sprinkle of strategy to help women call in more money and joy while they build their vampires. Welcome to the Closer Than You Think podcast. I love to start just with my guests, like kind of just learning about their childhood and what made them make the choices that they made to get them to where they are today, or kind of just like the road leading up to their success. So I would love to start there with you. Yeah.
I feel like that is like the most fun intro.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I had a very vanilla childhood on paper. And so my introduction into like inner child healing actually came from hiring who I thought was like a manifestation coach. And I always say, like, I'm so grateful to money because money for me has been like such a good carrot to get me motivated to do the inner work. Like, I wouldn't have hired an inner child healing coach because I didn't know that that was a thing or that I needed it. But I was like, oh, manifestation. Well, I know I want more money, and I can tell that I have some unhealthy beliefs around it that aren't supporting me. So let's do this. And I was so surprised when in like the first session, she was like, so tell me, like, what was it like to be your father's daughter? And I was like, my whole throat chakra was just like,
Wow.
And I just felt tears welling up in my eyes. And then I didn't know why I was crying. And I felt all kinds of like weird judgment for myself around that. And we ended up going on this really beautiful, like 12-week journey of healing my relationship with the masculine through my relationship with my dad, and same thing with the feminine through my mother. And I was so surprised how much was there, because I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, I grew up in a home with both parents, and, you know, they were both loving people. They did their best. Did they screw up? Sure. But like, I was very fortunate. I didn't experience any like physical abuse or sexual abuse, or like I wasn't emotionally manipulated or any of that kind of stuff. And so like, because I didn't relate to like these big capital T trauma stories, I just thought there wasn't anything there. Mm-hmm. Turns out I was wrong. and there was tons of stuff. And so I can share like what some of the themes of those things were, which was like, as it related specifically to my dad, I felt like I had to get it right and I had to be right and I had to earn love and approval. Otherwise there would be judgment and potentially risking like my belonging in the household. I had witnessed with my sister and even myself, like sometimes, it's like if there were friends of ours that my dad didn't think were making good choices, it was like, they're out. You can't hang out with them anymore. And so I really internalized that as like, oh, if I make bad choices, if I don't do the right thing based on what someone else thinks, then I might be out of the family.
Right.
And so it was just a lot of like earning and approval seeking. I internalized that there wasn't a lot of room for error, even though, I've actually had healing conversations with my parents about this stuff. And of course they're like, oh, that's not, like that wasn't what we were trying to convey or communicate. And then with my mom I really felt like I was a burden. She was a working mom and she like her perception of time, like when she's working and she's concentrated, like she just loses track of everything else that's going on around her. And so she would very frequently forget to pick me up. So I'd be like the last one at tennis camp or the last one at tennis practice. And it's just me and the coach. And then I feel like I'm a burden on the coach as well, because they can't leave while there's still a kid here that needs to get picked up. And clearly my mom has more important things to do because I'm just like this afterthought. Yeah. So that was definitely a kind of a primary wounding, but then there was also some feelings of abandonment. There were just a few different memories that I had from childhood that I contextualized that way. And so, I just grew up trying to earn the love and approval of everyone else and just trying to be the good girl and the people pleaser and, get all the pats on the back and the good grades and climb up the corporate ladder. And I didn't have a lot of feeling of like, I have my own back and I care about me and I love me. And that's the most important thing. It just literally never occurred to me. And so I was subconsciously just seeking it everywhere else.
Thank you for starting there, because, sometimes when I ask that question, a lot of people dance around and they don't really share the actual stuff. And so thank you for sharing that.
We just dove right into the deep end.
Right in, and I just love it. I'm like, oh, I just feel like so relaxed right now because you're so real, and I love you. And it's so important. I think it's just so important because I think so many people think that it's the big T traumas, like the really big things that hold us back the most. And I've found that, I've gone through my own journey of like even healing PTSD, CPTSD from my own experiences. And there is a lot of people who just identify as a victim, as a trauma survivor, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I guess in my own journey, I never wanted to identify as somebody who was a victim, even though I've been through some pretty, tough things. Like when I share my childhood with most people, they're just like, whereas for me, it was normal until I started doing inner child healing and realized actually how unnormal it was. But the little things like that you shared around just the dynamics between your mom and dad, I think on a societal level, most people can really relate just to the dad wanting to like protect and doing it in ways where we internalize it and make it mean something else. And the mom, the feeling like a burden and the feeling like because, like parent, like even when I look at my mom, there was just so much pressure to
keep the household intact and like be the housewife and then also be the mom and also be a great wife. And also she was very career driven. Some mums maybe weren't so much, but like my mom was. And so like balancing all that, there's just a lot of frustration. And then you watch women who compromise pretty much their whole life. And there wasn't the available like information that we have today to be able to learn about ourselves and get to know ourselves and so many cultural and societal expectations. So like even if you don't have the big T traumas, I'm sure so many people can just relate to that general dynamic.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that you didn't even think that you needed inner child healing, which, you know, most people don't think that they do, until you get on the path to wanting, I guess, I don't like saying more, but because I don't even believe in that. I just think life is about expansion. And so like if you're just desiring a different experience of life and that includes more money, then you're going to inevitably come up against certain things that are, like keeping you at a certain ceiling, I guess.
Yes.
And so for you were just like, I just want to manifest things and I want to like, you know, I desire new things and I'm seeing people, you know, create these lives for themselves. Is that how it happened for you? Like you saw other people succeeding in different ways, or was it something that just came like, you were like, I don't want to work this corporate job anymore. And then you just started like, how did it kind of unfold for you?
Yeah. I mean, at this point in my journey, I was already a full-time entrepreneur, and was running the agency. And I think we were at around like $30,000 or $40,000 months.
Mm-hmm.
But also we're like building a small team and what have you. And so I think I was paying myself like max $5,000 a month, which, you know, was a much lower salary than what I was earning in corporate. And I had way more stress and pressure, and it just felt hard.
Yeah.
And I did have some examples around me where it just didn't seem that hard for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like the first time that I started getting a peek into my subconscious and realizing that like, oh, I think I have some really conflicting thoughts and feelings about money. And I really suspect that that is creating a problem for me. And before that, I wasn't aware of it. I wasn't plugged into like the coaching world. And I'd always been plugged into spirituality, but it was through Eastern religion. And if you know anything about like Hindu and Buddhist kind of practices, it's like, oh, the less is better. Like desires, yuck. We don't want to want things. And so there was never really any like money manifestation talk because it was like, no, we just want to get rid of that stuff. And so I had the spiritual, but I was missing that component of like self-help, inner work, therapy, that kind of thing. And like I said to you also, because I didn't have anything that felt like this massive thing I needed to process through, I didn't think I needed it. And I want to just say how grateful I am that you're creating spaces where we're talking about this stuff, because I also, when I did dive into that healing work, especially around inner child, I had a lot of like guilt and shame around then even feeling the way that I felt, because I was doing this like comparative thing and being like, this is crazy. Like, I can't be allowed to have felt like there was so much scarcity in my household growing up just because my parents fought about money, when the facts were that we always had food in the pantry.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I wasn't even allowing myself to feel what was there because it seemed so inconsequential compared to like other people's actual lived experience.
Oh my God, you just touched on something really important. Firstly, the both the spirituality and the Buddhist and Eastern religious principles. I've seen so many people fall into those traps of like letting go of desires, go meditate on a mountain. It seems like that's the highest possible, experience of life that you can have, which is, I feel like there's a lot of benefits to those teachings, but it becomes that same dogmatic thing that people fall into with just even Christian religion, and you see it with fundamentalist Muslims and like all of these religions that the human mind goes into this dogmatic. You see it in human design. It happens in human design. Like it just happens in every thing. This is not even a religion. But it's like crazy. And actually I'm starting to realize how much of my own spiritual bypassing that I was doing in the last few years. I feel like I'm out of that now, but there was a lot of denial. And when you're in the denial, you don't even know it. Like, you don't know it. You're just trying to, I guess, if you're a seeker, you're trying to find answers. It just kind of may inevitably happen if you don't have the right support and the right people you actually sometimes need those brutally honest people who are like, have you looked at this? Or like, what the F are you doing? Or like, So but there has to be a connection to the desire that you want something versus I just want to get rid of every desire. So
totally.
Super, super interesting because even though I never went down the Eastern route. I actually grew up in a very strict Catholic religious household. Like my family's from Croatia, so it's like very religious. And I kind of I felt like I was atheist a little bit for a while. I just didn't believe in anything. I was like, I don't believe in that. I stopped going to church, and really just kind of rebelled against every kind of, I guess, God or religion that there was. And then it was when I read Conversations with God by Donald Neil Walsh that I really started to redefine my relationship with God. And it was also Return to Love with Marianne Williamson. Those two books changed my life, like absolutely changed my life. So if anyone's listening, if you want to connect to spirituality in a really healthy way and connect to God and like a higher power in a really healthy way, those two books are phenomenal. And Return to Love is really just about love and clearing the mind of fear, which I think in the coaching world, a lot of people talk about capacity and nervous system regulation, which is all great. But I have found that a lot of that is actually just connected to love, how much you love yourself, how much you love other people, how much you can connect and bring more people into your world, especially if you're talking about scaling a business. And so that book's really powerful. And Conversations with God is really about, he really walks you through like how you just are an atheist and you just doubt meaning in life in general. And you're like, well, how come all this evil stuff happens in the world? Like, why should I believe that there's a God? And he has an answer. There's an answer for everything. It's literally a conversation with God. And so it's really amazing. Yeah. So those two books changed my life. But I have worked with and like just learned under like spiritual teachers who have coached people in front of me who have been on that journey of going to meditate in the mountains and like trying to get rid of their ego and like all of these things. And then they come back and they're literally like a shell of a person. And maybe this is in some of the most extreme cases. But they've fully like kind of disidentified from their temporal self, like their body. And this is, I think, where the conversation of embodiment comes into play. And not wanting to get rid of your temporal self. And it's where it gets too dogmatic, and it's like that path it is for some people, but it's not for everybody. I think we can all learn things from that, but it's really just about enhancing your experience of life and not really taking it further than that.
Totally. I mean, I had some I definitely had some unhealthy Christian indoctrination as a kid too. So I got a little dose of that. And that's definitely been like a healing journey as well. But yeah, with Eastern religion, it is true. Like I'm super grateful for it because I learned how to concentrate really well. And I really did learn a lot about the higher frequencies.
Yeah.
So, you know, I could sit in meditation for a really long time, and I knew what it felt like to be in those higher states of bliss and peace. And so I had had all of those experiences, but what I found was that, it felt like a really vast disconnect between how I felt in meditation and then how I felt having my human experience.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because, like, the spiritual path that I was on, there are a lot of people on that path who talk about like wanting this to be their last lifetime. And I never fully resonated with it, but it sort of made sense to me after the fact that like they were drawn to a path that in theory was enlightenment and would, you know, break all of the karmic cycles so that they could be done. And then it's like, well, no wonder they weren't enjoying this human experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's like when I finally was willing to like acknowledge, like, no, I actually want my human experience to be so awesome. And I want to love being here. And you know what? My soul fought hard for this incarnation and to be here having the human experience. So why am I spending it trying to pretend like I'm a soul not in a body? Like, my soul came for the body and for the experience. So let's just like live it up and make it really great.
Let's just live it up. I know. Oh my gosh. I know. And that is, yeah. And it's so great that, you know, you came from how you said you experienced something totally different in your meditations versus your real life. That's definitely, I think, where people can get really caught up with thinking like, and I've been there too. Like I've been like, okay, I just need to meditate longer. And it has supported me in many ways, like really creating that space internally and like connecting just to Mother Nature, I guess, and just the rhythms of the Schumann resonance, like just how the earth, like the vibrations of the earth, and just slowing down when you're in nature, you just feel it. And there's like that space that it creates. But then, yeah, when you come back to real life and especially running businesses, and that's what I want to talk to you about as well, like motherhood, running businesses, how you manage your time, like all of these things. It's like you can only, you know, meditating for 2 hours a day is not the most, I guess, productive thing that you can do. Although, yeah, and I just think that it can create those experiences where we think that that's a better experiences versus our everyday life. And I don't know, maybe there's a point that everybody comes to where you transcend that kind of desire to just want to, because that happened for me, where I was like, this is cool, but I feel like I'm done with it. I'm done with just meditating for hours a day. And like, even when I first moved here to this small country town with my partner, that's what I was doing, because I was really, really struggling with the transition. I was talk about focus. I could not focus at all. I was like diagnosing myself with ADHD, and like I probably do, but I was like, you know, all of these things, and I just could not focus and talk about concentration. Like it was just non-existent. And so like I did that, and it really, really helped to really connect me back. And I did lots of embodiment practices and that, but there came a point where I was just like, I'm just done. Like I'm ready to just dive back into real life and doing things and being a productive human and contributing to the world. And there just comes a point where it's like, yeah, but then every now and then I'll be like, yes, I just want to meditate. Like I just want to meditate before I go to bed, and I'll just be in my zone and do the thing. But it's much more like intentional with the way that I do it. So yeah, maybe there's a point that everybody kind of comes to that place where you just feel like, again, like you're in control of your life again. Yeah, because I think sometimes I turned to spirituality when I was deeply out of control of my life. That's what it felt like. It felt like life was happening to me versus me happening to life or doing life.
Well, and what I started to understand too is that as I experienced more layers of healing my wounded masculine and rebalancing my masculine feminine energy, it really shifted the way that I wanted to commune with God. And so part of the reason that I was drawn to this spiritual path to begin with, first of all, my dad started on that spiritual path when I was a teenager and he wanted me. And so again, good girl, achiever, like, oh, okay. So that's why I started meditating and following this Eastern religion path. And then it also was really quite structured. And so, which is so interesting because the guru that we were following was like an incarnation of love. And there was so much love and so much like divine mother, feminine energy in that sense. But then there was also like, well, you do this practice twice a day and you do it in this order. And there was like so much precision. And I never really felt like I was measuring up to the ideal, which secretly I liked. It was like all this subconscious, like kink stuff, because I always felt like I needed the measuring stick and I needed to have something that I was striving for. And I needed to be told what was right and what was wrong so that I could really figure out where I stood. And when I healed all of that, not through meditation, but through all kinds of other just inner work and such, then it was like, oh, I actually don't even resonate with any of that at all anymore.
Yes. Yeah. So I would love to talk about the balance between the feminine and masculine and how you touched on the good girl, because I think in business, like the good girl will never succeed.
Agreed.
I mean, like she really has I don't even know if she has any place at the table, to be honest.
I mean, I think where the good girl shows up and where she can have a certain level of success is like really following someone else's system.
Okay.
So like joining like James Wedmore's like Business by Design, which I've never done, but I've talked to people who have done it. And it's like, it's like a 70-step launch plan. It's like, we tell you exactly how to build your funnel, exactly the email automations, like, and you just be the good student, be the good girl and follow. And by the way, if you didn't get the results, you probably did something wrong, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And so I think like, that's where, if you haven't healed that part of yourself, you can have like a certain degree of success, but then usually those women just burn the F out. Because
is such a good point.
There is no alignment. It's not building the business the way that you wanted to. It's just that instead of a boss, now you're just following some coach or some mentor's way of doing things.
And such a powerful point. Yeah.
Yeah. You end up feeling exhausted and like you just created this crappy job for yourself all over again.
Oh my God, such a good point. That is exactly how I went. Like I was just the good, climbing the corporate ladder, good girl, doing as I'm told. Then I got into, it wasn't a business, it was actually Business by Design course. Basically, it wasn't James Wedmore, it was somebody else, but it was like the systems and like the funnels and the Facebook ads. And because I worked in corporate marketing and my background was in Facebook ads, like actually that's what I was doing. And I did start an agency, I was freelancing, but it was as I was doing like the business side of things and diving into my spirituality. When I say that, I mean really just getting to know myself, like doing all the things. Like I didn't even get an energy healer until about a year and a half ago. That's how resistant my inner child good girl was, I guess, too, because of my religious conditioning. I was taught that was dark and evil. Like that's how disconnected I was from my own energy and my own I had so much trauma that I didn't even remember my memories. Like that's how much, like you were talking about being left at school like late. I was like, now that you say that, I remember some moments like that, but I've had very little memory. And it wasn't until
that's how my husband is too. He experienced a lot of trauma with like a divorce when he was young. And it's like, he just like can't remember his young childhood at all.
Yeah. I literally remembered, you wouldn't believe how many memories I dug up in the last like 2 years, like things that were just like so vivid in my mind when I was doing the energy healing with like a shaman. And I was just mind blown. I was like, I remember those, but my conscious mind had totally buried it, like buried it. And it was just like, yeah, I think this is inner child healing can just be so, and it's not even just inner child, it's inner teenager too. Like the teenage moments, like those were actually some of the most brutal ones for me. That really linger on and like even shape your person. They say, your personality shapes at around 7 or 8 years old, but I think those teenage moments really then plague us for the rest of our like especially our 20s and 30s. And if they're really traumatic, you just bury them and you don't really know why you're doing the things that you're doing or reacting the way that you are until you discover those memories.
I think you bring up a really good point, because when we were talking earlier about like wanting more, just wanting to expand, and like that being a reason to do healing, like I would also argue, like if you just want sovereignty, like it's insane how much of our lives are dictated by our childhood and just recreating these patterns. And we walk around thinking that we're making independent decisions. And it's like, when I really started looking at it, my jaw was on the floor, because for the first time I could see how so much of the way that I related to my spouse and related to my kids and all of these different things were either perpetuating the same patterns from childhood or rebelling against those patterns. But also, that's not sovereignty. Like that is not making a true decision for what you want. You're just running this subconscious program. And I agree, like so many memories. I mean, I do have access to more. And I also have found that when I started committing to doing the work, memory bubbles would like surface.
Yeah.
And it was like something that I forgot happened that I hadn't thought about in 30 years.
Yeah.
And I always take that as such a good sign. Like it's never random when you just all of a sudden remember something that you couldn't remember. Totally. It's like you're ready now.
Yes.
And you can finally like deal with it and process it and move it through your body in a way that you just couldn't up until this very moment.
Exactly. I know exactly why all my memories came at a certain point. They only came to me when I got with my partner. There was no way that any of my memories could have surfaced before that. There was no safe container for me to do that. Not even in like a therapeutic situation. Like, so it's like there are certain times in your life, I think, where you just have to really grab the bull by the horns and be like, okay, this is surfacing for a reason. You have to be really present and consciously aware of that. And I just did, like things were just coming up. I also intentionally took the steps, but it was just like, okay, this is all coming up now. And so it's really inconvenient, but it's like, I also want to, I really want to work through this stuff. So I think that's important. Like, I think there's resistance in the terms of, I don't want to do this. Like, it's just, and that's where denial and avoidance and all that comes in. But then there's a time where it's like, this is really freaking painful, but I want to. And I think,
when I was doing it, I mean, I think I cried like 8,000 buckets full of tears. Like my husband would be like, he'd see me grab the Kleenex box and my computer and he'd be like, oh, you have a session with Sabrina again, right? And I'm like, yes, because it was just ungodly, like how much emotion was processing. And to most people, including my husband, he was like, babe, I support you in this. And he was like, don't ever ask me to do this. Because you know how like when you're going through something, you can like evangelize.
And
it's true. Like it was so painful and hard in those moments. And now I look back at it and I'm like, it was 12 weeks. And what I gifted myself is like, I cannot put a price tag on it. Like I am a completely different person in so many ways, and like ways that go far beyond just money or business. Like the amount of fun that I was able to start having with my kids, like I accessed like so much more playfulness. I wasn't as hard on them when they would like, you know, they were like toddlers. So like they knock over a cup of water, big deal. But like my initial reaction to that was like, like, why did you do that?
Yeah.
And I was noticing myself just like having completely different reactions. I could let things go. Things didn't even bother me. Like it really changed the dynamic in my relationship with my husband, like for the better. And so, yeah, it is painful and it's not for the faint of heart. And it's like, I suspect that people listening to your show, like, are into it and want it, or are at least curious about it and really believe in the payoff.
Yes. It's that part where you're like, I just was, you know, there was buckets of tears, and like, I think, I don't know, maybe this is my perspective, but it's like, I think so many people are still afraid of emotions, as if when you're upset, when you're crying, like if it has to be that painful to go through it, then it's not the way. Whereas I've always seen it the opposite. And maybe that's why I don't know, had some challenges with a lot of people in my life. And like, because I'm like, I think those are the breakthroughs. Those are what you need to run towards in order to, I've never been afraid of my emotions. And I've realized as I've been doing this work, and I was facilitating sister circles, and I realized how difficult it is for people to even just face their own true emotions, or they've just been suppressed or repressed for so long. And it can be seen as like, yeah, well, maybe this is not the right way. Like, you know, even with my partner, like sometimes, because he's not an emotional being at all. He's actually very stoic. He's very in touch with his masculine and all of that. And I don't know, he grew up in a very, very loving household. It was very different to mine. Not a lot of like shame, and you know, they're Fijian, so their culture is just like very loving, very very family orientated, religious too, but there's just like this lightheartedness about their entire culture. And it's probably because of how there's a lot of poverty and a lot of but everyone's together. There's just like this lightheartedness, fun, community-based. It's very different. Not a lot of expectations on like achievement and all of this. It's much more just like, I love you, and if you achieve, that's great, and like we accept you and we love you, but it's not like a requirement for you to gain our approval. I don't know, and
I think like that culture is like closer to indigeneity, and like indigenous cultures, like there's a much stronger fabric to the collective. And so there isn't that fine line between like you're in or you're out. It's like you're in. You're definitely in.
And that is why I know exactly why we ended up together. Like I'm like, it is just like clear as day. To me, it's been the most, he's made me a woman. He's actually made me like the best version of myself. And that, I just don't think that could have happened in any other way. It needed to happen. And just our cultures like mixing. So, it's been amazing. But what I was going to say is, what was I talking about?
Your partner grew up so differently, but I can't remember why we were talking about that.
But no, the balance we were talking about, I wanted to just touch on, we talked about James Wesmore's Business by Design. And I was like, and we were just talking about the good girl and stuff, and then we kind of went off track. Like I could talk about so many different things. But I exactly went down that road. I was like the good girl climbing the corporate ladder. And then when I realized like I really wanted to start my own business and do my own things, and realizing I had that opportunity, I was like, hell yes. And and it was that when I transitioned from corporate to just freelancing, there was so much shame for me around wanting more. And this is why I want to flip the script on it a little bit. And I'm like, it's this whole idea of just like wanting more, and you should just be grateful for what you have. Oh, I just hate it. I'm just like, yes, like I'm already grateful. Like I'm already grateful. Like I don't need to spend hours and hours every day reminding myself how grateful I am. It's a great practice to get you present, just to the present moment, and be like, yeah, like I'm so grateful for here and now. But there was so much shame around me wanting to grow and wanting, just wanting to be better. And I'm like, why is there so much shame around that? Like, and that was a huge thing for me. That took me ages to even uncover. And then when I realized it was shame, and I was like, oh, and then I had to realize like, oh, there's all these ties to like my parents. And like, if I, do something that's out of, like you're in or you're out, and there's all these subconscious ties to like, if I choose a different path, it's almost like a betrayal. Which is just so crazy, like to think about. But there's all these subconscious like ties that we've created from certain meanings that we've given certain things. And so, unraveling all that. But I went into like a thing that was like a business by design. It was like, do all this. And I just followed the plan like a good little girl. And I was really good at it. But I made some money, but I freaking hated the process. Yeah. I was like, and this is the thing though, I wasn't at a place, I was so conditioned. And I think those programs are great when you've already deconditioned from a lot of the, not just inner child stuff, but like even the corporate conditioning and like all the things that I was so not liberated in my own beingness. So it was like, so I was just so conditioned. And so the whole thing was just like, I felt more trapped. I literally felt like, it was like, you're just building another job for yourself. Yeah. Which is not totally bad. It's just that I was like, it's so much harder. Why would I do this to myself? I can just go back and get another job. Right. And it just wasn't the experience of life that I was really going for. Yes. So I had to totally ditch all that. I was like, plus I'm an emotional authority, which I'm like, I'm so emotional and just by nature, and I'm very spiritual. And so the energetics is actually really important to me and like connecting with people. And so it just wasn't the right way for me to go. But I think, once you've deconditioned and once you're making that choice to like build those systems from a place of like authenticity, and it's so different. Then it fully supports you and your business and all of that. But it's like, and I guess for me I'm a 3-line, I'm a 1-3. So it's like, I needed to go through those experiences to discover that for myself, which is kind of annoying sometimes because I'm like, why did I had to figure it out the hard way. But now I can coach people so much better through that. And, and so, we're talking about the good girl. And it's like, you're right. That is where the good girl can support you. And, I guess, and there's another fine line there because I'm like, is it really the good girl or is it just your ability to, I don't know, the word's not, I don't know, the word's not like submission, like submit to, but it's kind of like you're just following, like you're just following a thing. I still am like, I don't know if there's really anything good about the good girl. That's just I'm still processing that maybe.
No, I agree, but I just think, I just think that like there is this evolution and we're always going to attract things that grow us. Right. Yeah. And so it's like you were an energetic match for a program like that because you needed to have the experience of, okay, I can have some success, but if it has to be hard and I don't love it, am I willing to do that? Yeah. And by saying no, even if it was over time and you lost out on time or money or whatever, it doesn't really matter because it's still all building your experience.
Yes.
It's like that did help set you free.
Yeah.
Because that was like, oh, okay, no, I'm not willing to do it someone else's way if I don't like it.
Yeah.
Well, that's not something that the good girl says, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like it all aids in our healing. And
that's a good point, because do you know what? I have that mindset, and I've always had that mindset. Like, that didn't work out for me. And seriously, one of the investments was really disappointing. Like, I was just like, what a waste of money. Like, that was the worst 10 grand I've ever spent in my life.
Yeah.
And, well, I'd never spent that much except on a university degree, but it was the worst investment ever. Terrible. Yeah. I was just so disappointed in it. And, I'm like, I always knew that disappointment was never going to take me out. I just was very willing to find a different way. And that's when I stumbled across the coaching world. Before that, I didn't even know that there was female coaches who were running businesses in their own way, in their own authentic way, learning about, balancing the feminine and masculine, spiritual business owners. Like, I was just mind blown. I was so happy because I was just like, yay, like somebody like me. Successful and doing it in their own unique way with their own, beliefs and things that I were really in integrity with certain things that in the corporate world you just don't see. There's not a focus on energetics at all. There's not a focus on not even teamwork. It's really every man for himself type of thing, which is so funny because I guess, that's where I ended up, because that's what my family dynamics were like. So I had to, decondition all of that. And I lost my train of thought again. But anyway, the whole good girl thing and just following that precise way was, I had to decondition all of that before I really discovered how I could build my business in my own unique way, which I'll still say is very challenging. Like, you have to have a level of personal power that I've never accessed before. Or never really. And I still have my mind I have to really challenge my mind every day. But sorry, what I was saying was, I had that mindset of that disappointment is really annoying, but it almost I have this weird thing where I'm it almost drives me more. It drives me more to want to succeed in my own way. But I know for a lot of people that can stop them in their tracks. If you spend a huge amount of money on something and it just was really disappointing, and, sure, you can even maybe that's where the emotional intelligence comes into it, because it's how much responsibility are you taking for how you feel? Because you're talking about, even when you did the inner child healing and you're a new person, and even how you interacted with your children was different. Do you think a lot of that was because you just started to become more aware or take more responsibility for your own internal reactions and emotions?
No, I actually believe that in allowing myself to release and really process all of the stuff that my inner child was still holding on to, I was just showing up as a completely different person. There was no conscious choice point. It wasn't my kid was spilling their drink and I wanted to get frustrated and then was choosing not to. It was this wild out of body experience where I'm this actually just doesn't even bother me at all.
Yeah.
But I had been working with myself on it's safe to be human and it's safe to make mistakes and I still love you. Yeah. And so when I was able to give myself that permission to make mistakes and give myself that unconditional love, then I could give it to my kids. And it's I couldn't, if I was withholding it from myself, I just didn't have access to it for anybody.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
But when you talk about a disappointing investment, my initial reaction to that is join the club. Congratulations. You are now a card carrying entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And before I even got into the coaching industry, I was running a marketing agency for e-commerce brands, right? They would hire us and we would manage their advertising budget and their marketing presence on the Amazon channel to help them sell more. So I've been behind the scenes on like hundreds of businesses of all different sizes. And like, it's actually rare when we would talk to a business that didn't have a bad agency experience. Most of them were talking to us and they're like, I don't know, I'm skeptical because I hired an agency this one time and they promised me blah, 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 and it didn't work out.
Yeah.
And again, with them, I'm just like, join the freaking club, man. Like, congratulations on being a business owner. Like, this is not some story that's unique to you. And like, so what are you going to do? Like, never hire an agency ever again?
Yeah.
Or are you going to move on and learn from it? And maybe you ask better questions, or maybe you like, you know, have different expectations. And I do think when we do have emotional intelligence and we can take more personal responsibility, it does really help us. Because when I look at the investments that I've been like most disappointed in myself, almost always I'm in my damsel in distress. I am in my wounded feminine, and I'm like, you know, laying on the train tracks, hoping that like my hero swoops in to like rescue me at the very last moment.
Yeah.
And it's like, guess what? When you invest in that energy, the result is never, oh, the hero came and he saved me.
That is 100%, Emily, like 100%. There was definitely parts of me that were hoping that would save me in some way from the reality that I was in, but so unconscious. Like, you would never know that until where I'm at now. And it's like, now I feel like I'm at a level of personal power where it's like, it feels so good when you just, nothing can take you out, and you don't give that responsibility for anyone else saving you. But I know how hard it is, like, especially when you have certain childhood traumas where it's like you could spend your whole life trying to be saved by money, by a program, by an investment, by a coach, by somebody, but it's very unconscious. But yeah, I think it's like, but then life is always going to give you those experiences for you to keep saving yourself.
Right. For you to keep learning that lesson.
Yeah. And do you know what? I love the most profound thing that you said to me when I was in your mini mastermind was the story thing. Because you're like, and I think that's so powerful, because we can get so stuck in stories and think that it's our conscious way of processing something, or it's our I don't know, like it'll give us validation in some way, or like it's the commitment to being right.
Yes.
It's like that commitment to just wanting to be right. It's like, okay, that investment was disappointing and I'm right. Okay.
Right.
Now what? Like, who gives like, like, it doesn't mean anything, because like somebody else could have had a totally different experience. So cool for you, but then keep going. Like, what's next? And like, so actually so much, like, you're like, the story for me is like getting rid of this whole being right and also this good girl, and like, the damsel in distress and wanting to be saved and all of these things. But
let's talk about the being right thing a little bit more, because this one is so huge.
Yeah.
Like, people legit manifest cancer all the time because they want to be like, I knew those ceiling tiles had asbestos in it and they weren't safe. And I was telling my boss that for years. And it's like, they would rather be right.
Yeah.
When being right is a horrible outcome for them.
Yeah.
Than to be wrong and be happy.
Yeah.
And I see it in myself all the time too. And it's like, the more we can, like, us having this discussion, I really hope will set a lot of people free to like notice it and catch it.
Yeah.
Because it's like, is that something you want to be right about?
Yeah.
That's the most important thing to ask yourself.
Yeah.
Like, it's, you know, if I'm telling the story that like Facebook ads are hard and they don't work for me, which by the way, I'm not just like pulling that out of my bum. Like that is something I have said. And like, that is a story that I've perpetuated. But if I stop and say, is that something I want to be right about? My true answer is no. I don't want to be right about that. Actually, you know what I would love? I would love if at some point I started running Facebook ads in my business and it worked tremendously well and it was wildly successful. And so can I just like stop telling the story that I actually don't want to be true?
Yes, that's so true. And sometimes we really need that reflection. Like when you told me, like, sounds like you're just in a story. I can't remember what I was talking about, but I was like, it was just like clear as day to me. I was like, I'm in a friggin' story. Like it's so obvious. And like, because I knew, because it didn't feel good. And to me, when something feels good, it's the truth. And when something doesn't feel good, there's a layer of illusion there. There's something that's just not true.
Yeah.
And then I realized, that commitment to the being right thing is so tied to our victim consciousness. And I like to talk about that a lot because no one really identifies as a victim. Like, no one wants to be that. But I found that in owning my own victimhood, like in my own story, in my own life experiences, it's liberated me in lots of ways. Because I think the more resistant we are to actually being like, maybe in that circumstance, I was a victim. And it doesn't mean that I identify with it now. It's just seeing reality for what it is. And I think for me, it took a long time to get there though, because I lived so much of my life in denial. Like there was no way you could have told me that I was a victim to my circumstances, or that I had childhood traumas, or that just felt like such a betrayal to everything that I'd ever known. But that was what was keeping me so trapped. And it was also, that was making me so obsessed with being right. And so it's like all linked together. And then like when you liberate yourself from all of that, and then you're like, okay, like reality just is what it is. And I'm not in denial about it. I'm not making a story about it. Now I'm just in my personal power. Now I'm just like, okay, so what choices and what beliefs and all of these things do I want to have? And like, what's the story that I want to tell?
Totally.
And it's like, so it's just your experience of life. And it doesn't mean that there's never going to be any challenging thing happen after that. It's just that your experience of it is different because now you're empowered. And it's interesting because like a lot of these movements, like like the Boss Babe movement and all the empowered female movements, and like they've all been super helpful in liberating us to where we are now. But I think that I still see it. It's like there's still this layer of like, I'm empowered and like no one can mess with me. But there's just like this layer of still denial that's like underneath it. And it's not true empowerment. And that's where we start to see all the shadows. Not just in the coaching industry, just in the world, like in general. And
it's like we need to go softer.
I've seen it in all, and actually every woman that I grew up with was actually a very strong woman. Like to the outside, I grew up around very strong women. And it was like this, almost like but again, it was like there's this layer of like, there was something that was just an illusion. I was like, something's not fully right here, because then I was one of those, like I was the emotional caretaker of like everybody around me. And I was like, why does this feel so hard? And then, it wasn't until I had my spiritual awakening and like all of these things where I was like, I am taking care of everybody else's emotions who they are not even like in touch with their emotions, with their feelings and everything. And I had to really separate myself and be like, I'm out of here. And so, these like, we're talking about business, but it's also transformation. And I like transformation is really like the choices that you have to make. It is a real devotion to your life path. I just want to make it really clear for anybody listening. It's like, yeah, inner child healing, energy healing, it all sounds really fun and like cool and like, yeah, like let's just do it. And like, it's going to get me the results that I want. But it's like, it's such a devotional path. Like you have to really be committed to the transformation, and not see it as like a short-term fix thing. It's like, this is your life. And are you really like, if you lose, like if you start losing friends, if you start losing, you know, I had to make some really tough decisions that most people will probably never make. But I'm like, it is my life and I want to feel good in my life. And that doesn't mean cutting people off for the sake of, you know, just doing that. It's like some things will progress as they, I don't know, some things are just in God's plan. But I think that we really have to be just really honest with ourselves. And like, I've gone so far as to, I'm like, I just want to create some space between, you know, some of the situations. Like even me moving here was creating space, and it revealed so much. And I'd already been on the spiritual journey for like 8 years. So I'd already done so much conscious work and like so much subconscious work and just so much healing already. And it's like, it wasn't until I moved like from the city that I was in, and my soul was calling me somewhere else.
Yeah.
And then a whole nother layer revealed itself. And it's like, you know, but but that was a soul calling. I guess I just followed the path, and that's my devotion, I guess, to it. Yeah. So, you know, it's like, I just want people listening to know, it's like the more devoted you are to this path and like listening to the call, wherever it is, even if it's like just moving to a different city, it's like those things mean something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's like, you don't really have to go hunting down like what you want to heal.
Yeah.
I really believe that you just sort of like set an intention for what you desire in your life.
Yeah.
And like, don't set the intention for what you want to heal. Set the intention for the desire. And then what will naturally surface are the things that need to heal. Yes. Or you'll get the intuitive nudge to move, and then you'll be brave enough to follow it. Yeah. And all of a sudden you're in a completely new identity because all of your old habits and your old ways of being don't work anymore because you're in a new environment. And then like the next layer of healing is there, and it just naturally brings stuff up. Yeah. So I do think like when it's more about like, what do you want, and allowing yourself to like move toward that. And like you said, bringing devotion into it. I mean, I've been experiencing a whole new level of that since I went to Egypt. And I mean, I think I can say it here. I don't know if I'm brave enough to like say it on my own podcast yet, because it still just like sounds so woo and it sounds so weird to me coming out of my mouth, but it also is true, which is which is like, I went to Egypt not knowing why, but just knowing I was meant to be there. And what was revealed to me was really like being initiated into the priestess path by the goddess Isis. And even when I knew that to be true, I was still like, I don't know what the hell it means to be a priestess. And so I started asking some of the other sisters that went on this same Egypt retreat, like, what does it mean to you? What does the priestess path mean? And everything they were saying, I was like, oh, I'm already doing that. I'm already doing that. And so I had this really interesting revelation of like, oh, this is it. But then there was a deepening that happened where I realized what it means to me is it truly is like seeing the divine in everything. And so like, I've been using this hashtag lately, the like holy mundane. And it's like, that's what it is to me, is it's like, it's taking the mundane, which like, I'm in a season of motherhood and whatever, where like, there's a lot of routine. There's a lot of like cleaning up messes and washing dishes. And like, somehow the counters are dirty again, like 0.2 seconds later. And And it's like,
yes,
it's mundane, except it's not, because as soon as we infuse devotion into it and divinity, and we see it all as like being part of our evolution, then it's like suddenly we're having spiritual experiences like left, right, and center.
yes. Oh my God, that is so 100% true. I know I'm exactly where I'm at, where I'm supposed to be right now, because and that's why I really want to talk to you about motherhood and business, because I know that's where we're heading, me and my partner. Like, I want to have children in the next couple of years, and I want to have a business that I can run while I'm, taking care of them. But I know that I don't have them now, because honestly, where I'm at in terms of I've been doing a lot of what's changed my life in the last year or so has been parts work, internal family systems. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. But we have I know I have these parts. There's still a lot of perfectionism. There's still a lot of like me trying, even wanting to keep the house clean all the time. And imagine Tanya, if you had kids right now and they were dirtying everything and you were trying to focus, and you'd just be like, you wouldn't know how to handle it all, not in a graceful way anyway. And so it's like, that's what I'm preparing myself for now.
Yeah.
I want to be a graceful mom. I want to be a mom that's present and not blaming them for things and being kids. And I want to have that space in me to be able to do that and still not compromise on my dreams. So I'm actually preparing for that now.
I love that.
Yeah. And I'm so I've just always had that dream. And that's a huge part of why I left corporate as well. Because I was like, I don't want to work for somebody else and raise my kids and send them to a daycare and just work 5 days a week. I don't know, that just never really felt right to me.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of benefits in that too. I'm not saying it's wrong. Again, it's just I just knew I had this desire. And so I was like, well, everything's gonna, and I knew I wanted to build my own kingdom, with my partner too, because because I never saw that in my life. And so I really wanted to build that. And so, and so I'm preparing for it now. And everything that you're saying is there are still parts of me that are still obsessive about, having the kitchen counter clean and whatever. And it's and so I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, but I'd love to hear going into, your story of how running two, because you've got your agency and your coaching business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you're running two businesses. You've got two children under the age of 10 or
they're 8 and 5.
Yeah. And so I'd love, and boys too, right?
A girl and a boy.
Okay. Girl and a boy.
Yeah.
And so, I'd just love to hear how you manage everything. And I know you spoke a little bit about the devotion, infusing the devotion into the mundane, which I just love so much. Because I think often when we get on this spiritual path, we can think that there is, something that's more divine about meditating on a mountain versus being in everyday life.
Right.
Yeah. And it's but when you infuse that devotion and spirituality and just intention or into every single moment, that awe in every single moment, that's when your experience of life becomes so much better. And I just want to touch on one thing too, though. So yes, all of that, I want to hear about how you I want to say manage, but just dance with all of that. And how you also are cool, but I want better. I want to be better, and I want more in my business, and I want to keep growing. I want to keep expanding, and there's no shame around that. And maybe, you want more support in your life and all of that as well. So I just love to. Yeah.
I mean, oh my gosh, we could record a whole episode just on this, but just kind of touching on some of it. First of all, I am someone that loves to work. I truly do. I'm a manifesting generator in human design. And so if I'm lit up, I can just go. And so it's the harder part for me is sort of having healthy boundaries around it. And it's been a work in progress over the years. And I'm so happy with the place that I'm in now, where I work 20, maybe 25 hours a week. And And I'm really present for my kids. Like I get to volunteer at their school whenever there's stuff. Like I just don't miss those things.
Yeah.
And it's because I have such a clear vision. And I do feel like kids are really, really good about helping you gain the right perspective. Like you really understand how everything is a season and how quickly those seasons change. And it's like, you know, there's a saying around raising kids where it's like the days are long and the years are short. And it's so true. You know, it's like sometimes you're just like, oh my God, can we fricking get to bedtime? Like we are on the struggle bus here, you know? And then it's like blink and, you know, my daughter's 8 and we're just kind of like towards the tail end of summer. And I had this moment where it was like, oh, we have 10 more summers together before she's an adult. And it's like, holy smokes, like how did that happen? You know? And I don't approach it from scarcity or lack or like time's running out, but more just like, can I stand by this? You know what I mean? Like, am I going to look back on this season and really be able to stand behind the choices that I made? Because what I realized is like, I'm not going to be able to look back on the elementary school years and feel great if it's like, I really was pouring into my business and I wasn't at the kids' school stuff.
Yeah.
Like, but I know I can stand behind being at all of their things and the business just grows how it grows. Yeah. Like I still want it to grow and I still am putting my best effort into that.
Yes.
But not at the expense of the kids and being really present for them. So I think there's like this hierarchy for me and it really helps me with decision-making. And then having good team and having like good masculine structure, you know, it's like the more that you're doing, like people are like, how do you run multiple companies? And it's like, well, I just put really good people in place and set up good business processes so that it isn't all on me all the time. Yeah. Because wouldn't feel good, you know, like that would drive me crazy. Yeah. And it's not like I get it perfect. And I've just been through a whole rigmarole of trying to get different people on the team and really like up leveling the amount of support that I have. But it's like, even when people haven't worked out, I'm not just like, well, I guess this isn't meant to be. And I guess I'll just do it myself. It's like, no, I'm still holding the vision for being like so well supported and really having like an amazing right-hand woman. And so I'm just going through whatever this refinement process is in order to find that person.
Yes. Okay. So say if you are, because like, because you've been an entrepreneur for how long now?
8 years.
So would you say that you're able to do all these things, like spend time with your children, because you've built all the systems and the foundations and everything that you need to support you in business?
No, I mean, yes, I think that's been helpful, but I guess what I want to say no to is like, you know, I've been an entrepreneur for 8 years. I've been a full-time entrepreneur for 5 years. And the way that I used to be so in the wounded masculine that it was just like, I was never mentally turned off ever. And
I feel that.
And that didn't just change because like my businesses got to a certain size. Like that is a complete fallacy. There will always be like 80,000 more things you can do than what you have the time or the energy for. Yeah. And so it's like, the more that we can see that is a BS story and be like, okay, if I just believe that like there's always going to be more ideas and more things that could be done than I really have the time and energy for, then what that actually means is I just have to be discerning with my time and energy and really like spend my focused time on the things that I love and that give me energy and that move the needle, and then just try to delegate the other stuff. And some of it just doesn't happen, and that's okay too. Like if you ask me like why my YouTube channel isn't bigger than it is right now, it's like, well, I know it could be. It's not like I'm a dummy and I don't think that like YouTube could crush it or whatever, but it's like, it just hasn't been the priority. And that's okay.
Totally. You touched on something really important, the switch off piece. That's something that I really struggled with at the start. When I moved here and I went all in on my coaching business, which, mind you, I've been in the last year or so, I've been even questioning whether I want to be a coach. I don't, when people say like, I've never questioned this and I just know I was all in from the start. I'm like, that's great. Like, I love that for people. But I'm like, I've noticed in my own and how I'm designed is I throw myself into experiences, but I'm not like 100% like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Like, I'm like 100% in, but I also am like, I'm not going to kill myself if it's not the right thing for me. And so I've been questioning like whether I even want to be a coach and I feel like a lot of it has to do with more the business model side of things and like how I want to run my business. But then life keeps showing me, it's like, no, Tanya, you're definitely meant to be here. You're definitely meant to be doing this. Like, so life keeps kind of showing me that, which is just like more evidence, I guess, for me to really be even more devoted.
Yeah.
That you touched on like the switching off. I was just like, I really struggled with that. So how do you now like go from investing, like putting heaps of time into your day and then just like switching off? So your mind can have time and your body can have time to relax. So you're not like burnt out by the end of the year or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is still a work in progress for me too. Okay. And it's something that like, when I'm being honest, like I identify that like, I don't think I'm where I ultimately want to be yet.
Do you think it's a skill? Do you think it's a skill or do you think it's something more, I don't know, like spiritual than that?
I really believe that so much of it has to do with, discipline and like setting up structures.
That's a good point.
And there's healing too, right? Because there's this kind of like codependence, like, I don't know if my business is okay and I have to make sure that it's okay. Yes. But we also need to understand that like literally the brightest minds in human psychology are being hired by companies to figure out how to get us addicted and keep us plugged in and keep us like in this perpetual cycle. So if we sort of just think that like somehow it's going to just magically happen, that we're going to be able to turn off, we're fooling ourselves. Yeah, that's a good point. We are designed like everything that we're using for our businesses, social media, email notifications, like all of that is designed to keep us like constantly plugged in. And so, like I was just on a week-long vacation and for the first time, I've been coaching for 2 years. For the first time, I told my clients, like, I'm deleting all the apps for the week and I'm like totally turning off. And it was hard to do because the truth is I really love that coaching space. It's not hard. Like, it maybe would have only been, I don't know, 30 minutes worth of work during that week that I was gone. Like it would not have been a heavy lift. Yeah. But forcing myself to do it. Yeah. I noticed that like, there was a part of me that was like, oh, but like, what if my clients need me while I'm gone? And like all of these stories. And I was like, no, it's going to be so good for my nervous system. And even just to repattern my body that when I'm on my phone, like I can't go to that app. Because it was almost like this automatic thing. And then it's like, well, it's deleted from my phone. So I do think we have to get intentional and we have to like put in place some distance between ourselves and these devices that allow us to stay on all the time.
That is just a beautiful point. I think discipline and boundaries. Like when you talk about codependence, I'm always like, because that's so true. Like if we want to be needed, if we feel like people need us versus it being like a service thing, it starts to become really codependent. And that's where, the burnout and all the lower frequencies come in that are just not going to serve us or the other people actually. So really good point. And it's, again, it seems so basic, but it really does come back to that. Like, really having boundaries about, your phone, and especially when you have children and like you're running and you want to maintain like a household and, be present with them. So are there any other tips that you could give us around just motherhood and business and how like you structure your days?
I mean, I work while my kids are in school. So I do think that actually like kids help us to have better boundaries in that sense, because it's like they're gone from these hours. So it really makes sense for these to be my working hours. And then when I pick them up from school, I'm like shifted into this different mode where we're just doing extracurricular activities, or I'm like more focused on them. So in that sense, like my work schedule got a lot easier actually. When my kids became like the age where they could be in preschool or school. What else? Also just like blocking all vacation days on the calendar, including like school holidays, because your kids will be off school a lot more than you would necessarily take a holiday. And especially, oh my gosh, like the year I lived in Australia, I was like, what are all these holidays? This is amazing. We get the Queen's birthday off and like all of this. But it's like your kid's holiday schedule is going to be really generous. And there are days when you maybe would have normally worked. And so I just find that like, just give yourself that gift, like block all of those days on your calendar. And then, again, like, as you're talking about, like, how
as in like don't work, like you don't work when your kids are on holidays, or
right. Yeah. Cause it's like, they're going to be home. So if I'm going to try to work, like, it's not really going to be fun for any of us. And so, but if I don't block it in advance, I'll accidentally like schedule something on that day because I'm not thinking of it. And then I think like, as you were talking about, like, the question of how do you want to set up your business? None of my days are like packed full typically. And so there is like that flexibility, like if the school calls or my kiddo has to come home sick or something like that, like just having a little bit more spaciousness and having, a chunk of your business being like programs that people can just access where you don't have to be on a call. So I definitely built my coaching business where it wasn't like, I'm going to be on a zillion one-on-one calls all the time. Because I don't want to have a full calendar. And I don't think that supports motherhood as well as having more like group stuff or more evergreen programs.
So true. Yes. The business model is so important depending on your stage of life, right? Okay, well, I could talk to you forever, but I know we've been here for a while. So I have 2 closing questions that I ask all my guests.
Okay.
So the first one is, if you could leave behind one piece of advice, what would it be? Only one.
You're doing great. Give yourself a pat on the back. Like, you're doing probably so much better than you think you're doing.
Take a
minute to like love on yourself for that.
Oh, I feel that. Thank you. The validation is so received. That's a good one. We can so feel like not enough sometimes. Like, and again, it's just a human unconscious story, right? Okay. And the second one is, if you fill in the blank, you're closer than you think.
If you do the work, you're closer than you think.
Yes. I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Love this conversation. It was amazing. So thank you for your vulnerability and your time.
My pleasure.